Hello, Untamed Beasts. I am going to do some finish up today on my warband for the original set of WarCry. That I've painted in a whole series of videos. So WarCry painting through WarCry painting 7 or 8. How many ever there were. And what I want to do is, it worked out perfectly on this one, is paint the bases with Vallejo Surface Primer US Olive Drab. And I want to use some flow improver to make it flow down in the cracks. Other than these bases here, which are actually Games Workshop. Let me move them back so you can actually see them. Games Workshop bases. These other ones are 3D printed resin bases, and they seem to be kind of difficult, but they're going to be worth the effort because they look awesome. I keep stuff dust free in slider boxes like these. Really good because you don't want your models dusty, definitely. So it's good to come up with some kind of a solution. An additional problem I have is this is some Vallejo surface primer that I mixed up to be flesh colored, and because I was priming them in something like this, I couldn't really go up from the bottom. And those paddles that you have that use rubber bands to hold them makes a stripe on the bases, which I don't like. So I think in the future what I'll do is tape them onto like the edge of one of these lab notebooks so that I can come up, so I can come up from a 45-degree angle to make sure that the skin is actually primed. So I'm probably going to have to do the least effective thing on the skin areas that look gray on these, which I've been able to observe more when I took pictures of them for the thumbnails for YouTube than I actually did while painting them. I didn't really notice it as much. I guess I was viewing them mostly from the top. But it's become blatantly obvious that they could use some more priming on the skin if I don't want their skin to be sort of grayish, which I'm tempted to just allow it to be like that, but I'm probably not going to do that. So using a brush with primer is a very ineffective method, so I need to make sure that my miniatures are getting better primed when I do that first step. In my last video, I spent quite an effort repairing this one because there was a piece of sprue that was stuck to her kidney that I didn't notice. And shout out to Tabletop Minions. He had said that there's a difference in quality in the plastics. And I believe that's true too. I saw that with the WarCry Stormcast that I was assembling yesterday. But I believe in response to that, once you go in there with primer or something like that that contains polyurethane, I think it will stabilize that plastic. I've sort of started to notice that once these things are primed, they seem to be much stronger. So that's good. I don't have as much of a concern over those figures that I built in my WarCry build video as I once did. I think also spray can primer may contain something. I've kind of noticed this with oil-based paints too. I think they will make your miniatures a little bit stronger as well. And they've fallen and bounced in boxes like this from up on top of shelves. And for the most part, with a few exceptions, they've held up pretty well, which I'm surprised for. I haven't had any problems with the paint shipping or anything like that. Although I am spraying these with the Shifters iridescent paint from Vallejo over the top of it, and maybe kind of acting as a varnish in some cases to protect it. So without any further ado, I'm going to use my wet palette here. And I've started using this little silicone cup for some flow improver. And what'll happen is the alcohol will evaporate and it will probably leave the glycerin. So I might get a higher concentration of glycerin in this stuff as I continue to do it. But it certainly evaporates slower because of the top actually fits down over these. I got these little silicone cups from UV polymerized resin. They're for mixing paint with the resin before you polymerize it. So that's where I got those. And actually the brush I wanted to put this on was my base brush here. I like a base brush with a little bit of an angle to it. So I'm going to put my primer on the wet palette, kind of messy. Definitely not a good idea to have paint on your hands. And alcohol was kind of burning in little micro cuts that I have. And let's see how well this does. So I'll probably start with this one. I may have less work to do on her flesh since I've already done some of that before. And I'll just start applying this primer. Yeah, that's nice and liquid. And then I can get all the way down to the edge where it won't get on my table, the primer. It'll get on this booklet. And then what I'll do when I prime things on this booklet is I will make a cross of tape or a double cross, triple cross like that. It reminds me of the 40K symbol for one of my favorite content creators, to stick these down. And these resin ones work especially nice because they have flat bottoms. This is working very nicely. And I could even stick them down so that I don't have to hold them. I think I'll do that. Then I can go ahead and use this for priming. So what I do is I make a loop of tape that's sticky on the top and the bottom. And I cross it over so it's a little bit more stable. And then just stick it down. The problem with touching the base while you're holding it, while you're painting, is you get finger oils on it, and that's sort of resistant to the primer or any other paint. There are some little structures that are on the base. It's a little bit wobbly, but there's some structures right here that I'm gonna not paint with the US olive drab right now. So I'll allow that to dry. And I think this sort of triple cross form will probably be more stable, especially once I start putting multiple figures on it. Didn't make that one quite long enough. All right. So definitely the flow improver repels water. It's hydrophobic if you know your chemistry. And non-polar rather than polar like water. But it's not too bad to work with. Certainly like the idea of not having to hold this with my fingers, constantly wiping the paint off. Now, as it was suggested by Tabletop Minions, shout out to Tabletop Minions, you want to go around in one swoop and allow it to dry between extra layers. And the reason for that is, and he says he can tell if you don't do this right, in that you'll remove the partially dry layer skin with the new layer if it's not completely dry, and he'll be able to tell exactly what you did because of the texture that it creates. Now, if I'm not completely happy with how this turns out, I can certainly go over it with Death Robe Forest, my favorite Citadel paint. Gives a nice, really rich color to the base, which I really like. And I'm steadying my shakiness with my other hand as I go around. And the reason I like this brush that's got kind of a point to it somewhat is so I can get in there underneath them in kind of tighter spaces. And kind of in corners and stuff. Particular pieces that I'm painting right now, I believe, come from Gamer's Grass. They're basing bits. And I've just put my regular phone on a stand and I'm using the flashlight feature of it. Real nice, intense LED light. The shape of the brush kind of allows me to kind of stab it in there a little bit too. And not using one of my other brushes allows it, the brush not to lose its point. One of my detail brushes to lose its point, so. Additional advantage of using this brush rather than a detail brush. Nice little focus light. And it's nice to have it on a stand because it's convenient to grab and providing some light even when you're not holding it. Our general light. It's like a little piece of the ravaged land's mausoleum. Now I avoided painting that because I thought it was a skull. And I may find out that I was right, that it was a skull, and that I shouldn't have painted it. I looked at it all from all angles and I just don't see that it looks that much like a skull. But that would be real typical for me to do, to attach a skull to it. I have the set of Citadel skulls that's out of print. They're kind of a weird plastic, but it would certainly look unique. One of them that was in this set was this one right here. Kind of an orc skull. Okay, and just the weight of this big guy right here will help to stabilize him too as I paint him. It looks like I put down a pretty good amount of primer. Enough without going back to the container and getting more on my hands. This container's kind of messy. And also not wasting a lot. Now these guys are kind of in my way as I paint. And I used to mask over these with masking tape before I did the iridescent paint. I don't bother anymore. I don't really think that it matters that the base is a little bit iridescent. Or at least I'm not a perfectionist enough to worry about it. Okay, what I'm really concerned with now, I'm going to go wash this brush real quick. Seem to have come out pretty clean. So the advantage of this big brush too is that I can put a lot of paint on it without getting paint in the ferrule as much. All right, so now I really want to look at these guys for gray parts. And then I can see some misses too that I made that I can fix at the same time. So I definitely see some on this guy right here. Prop him up so he's a good angle. And then I'm going to use my phone light. And I'll put some more flow improver on this brush because I did it before. I'm going to put this down in the same spot where I put primer and flow improver before. It's acting pretty well. And fortunately, the places where I missed with them, like the upper thigh, are places that are kind of highlighted in the with the paint. So exactly how that'll turn out with the iridescent paint over it is kind of an unknown. Places where I whooped with the paint are kind of hard to cover with the flesh tone surface primer and requires multiple coats, definitely. Turn this guy around, hopefully his primer is dry. In a lot of ways I'm highlighting them because those same areas that would get some stray paint on them would also be highlighted if I were painting for that purpose. And because I have it thinned down, it's pretty transparent too, so I touched up a place where I had done yellow on his windings around his arm. And despite putting a dab of this, the yellow still shows through. I think I'm going to turn him around so I can get at the back of him a little better. See my videos on my big screen TV, that's when the mistakes I've made are very apparent. Now, I don't see much more. This guy's pretty gray. So I'm going to, in general, go over his skin with the primer somewhat, just to give him some more flesh color. But YouTube sends me these little, I'm sorry about the light shining on you there. YouTube sends out these little notices about the statistics of my watchers. Thank you all for watching and subscribing. And says that only a small percentage of people actually watch my videos on a big screen TV like I do, so maybe they're not really seeing it as much as I am anyways. But it's kind of holding me to a higher standard, so I like that. So anywhere they're kind of gray, because they didn't have any primer on, touching up. Now I got some on his boot, so I'm just taking this really cheap, damaged dry brush that wasn't cleaned properly by the young people that I was teaching how to paint, and removing excess paint while it's still wet. So these little pieces of tape that I'm putting here, as long as I don't get a lot of paint on the tape itself, it will still stick, and it will certainly still stick wherever these were attached to it. All right, pretty nice. Okay, so that's what I've done to fix the bases and the skin for these untamed beasts. So I appreciate the views, I appreciate the subs. The next thing that I will do is make a video where I get the airbrush out and I spray all of these with iridescent paint. When I take a picture of all of them up close with the camera and look at it on the big screen TV, if it passed that test. Thank you, Untamed Beasts.